And this is a small piece of a project that we're working on to provide further security for emailers that use our service. Phishing is a really important problem for us these days. 90% of all the data breaches that happen happen through email. Those before they happen and prevent people from doing harm to themselves by helping them to identify when phishing might be occurring. It's among the top 3 cyber crimes that the FBI Internet Crime Center reported. And the average company, 10,000 is, I guess, an average medium to big size company, spends almost $4 million a year dealing with phishing and the results of it. And practically everybody gets phished. I looked up about 0.006% of the emails that flow through our U.S. data center on any given day are identified already as phishing. And I think we can actually do a better job of that. So this slide just shows you some more of the cyber crimes that are out there. Many of them already start with the notion of phishing, with people trying to steal credentials and get them to log in and give the password and things like that. So phishing is a serious problem in terms of the crime that's committed. It's also a serious issue in that there's lots and lots and lots of phishing sites. They tend to last a very short time, but this is from the anti-phishing working group, and it's just from October to March of this year, and the number of unique phishing websites that were reported to the anti-phishing working group for each month. It's just a staggering number of sites that are out there that are looking to try to steal stuff from you. Most of the phishing sites are online for only a few hours, a majority of them at least. And that struck me as being really problematic. Because one of the things it means is if you have a blacklist that says, oh, don't go to this site because we know it's a phishing site, it's never going to work. Because if it's going to take more than 4 to 8 hours for somebody to report a phishing site, for somebody to verify it, for somebody to add it to a blacklist, and by then it's gone. So if it's going to take hours to get the job done, it's not going to get done. What that also means is that they tend to use one-time domains. That is, once you've identified a domain as phishing, it's worthless to anybody who uses a service that blacklists. So they tend to use one-time URLs, one-time domain names, which means the best business to be in if you want to deal with phishing is a registrar, because people are registering a lot of domains with you. But it also means that they're always creating new ones. When I first thought about this project, somebody else, one of my colleagues brought it up, and I said, nah, that's not going to work. And the reason I thought it wasn't going to work is because if you look at domain names and URLs, the phishers are getting clever at least the same rate as the detectors are getting clever. And so if we find something to do with a phishing URL, a phishing domain, they're going to figure out a way to get around that real quickly. The problem is they have to deal with the real world. They have to deal with the fact that there are the namespace for URLs is already pretty crowded. And so there are certain features that have to go into creating new domains all the time that we can detect. And that's in essence what we did. Phishers prefer to use links to get your information from you. And the reason they prefer links is because they can change it at the back end. If they send out something to you and ask you to do something with it, well, it's out of their control once it goes out. But if they send you a link and you manage to click on it, you manage to go there, you manage to misidentify the landing page as a site where you should be entering your credentials, they've got you. So links are still a preferred method of access to private information. There's also a very high volume of these things. I mean, there's volumes of websites. There's also volumes and volumes of emails that go out because it's so cheap. You don't have to even know anything about anybody. You just say, hey, we're going to cut off your bank account. Come log in here. And you know, if somebody is a customer of that bank, it might work. If somebody's not a customer of that bank, who cares? It doesn't cost you anything to send out anything. Now, if the scheme ever comes up where the federal government is going to charge you 5 cents for every email, as you've no doubt seen the rumors going around, by the way, then that would change. But for now, sending out emails is trivially easy. It's inexpensive. You can even get HTTPS registration for free now. And an overwhelming number of the phishing websites use it because many of the browsers would come up and say, secure. Well, it's not secure. It's just the connection is secure, not the web page is secure. So now the browsers have changed to say not secure when it's not, rather than secure when it is, because it's not secure when they say it is. I don't know if you follow that, but. Now, the other reason we want to look at URLs for this kind of analysis is for triage. That is, if we try to understand the email and we try to understand the landing page, well, that means it's going to take several seconds to go to the landing page, retrieve it, analyze it, compare it with the email, and that's not a good use of resources. So you'll see in a minute or so that the ability to identify phishing URLs is not perfect, but it's a good step in part of a larger process. And the trick is to be able to know when you have to engage the larger process. So what we're going to do is we're going to use machine learning to recognize the characteristics of the phishing URL. Now, the phishers are using machine learning to identify what they should be sending you. And we have to use AI to identify who's trying to steal stuff from us. And it goes back and forth, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So one of the key points here is that the domain space is actually very crowded. I have some data on that coming up shortly. But if it's so crowded, that means that people have to be creative to generate the appropriate URLs, because they have to be able to control the URL. So they have to have a process for creating novel URLs, and they have to have a process for controlling them. Because if it goes to if it actually goes to the bank, well, they don't get anything from it. So it has to go to something that looks like your bank, but isn't. But the truth of the matter is that people don't pay much attention to the actual URLs. They'll look at the text and the text that goes with it, and the anchor, and they may or may not pay attention to that, but I don't have exact data on whether sensible URLs are more successful than nonsensical URLs, but nonsensical URLs are still pretty successful from a phishing point of view. So what we did is we identified a whole bunch of features that, that could be in URLs. And included in that list of features is a set of letter sequences, whether it has a domain name, a top-level domain in the path part of the URL, whether it has certain other characteristics, whether it uses HTTPS because that's relevant to identifying whether it's phishing, and some other kinds of things. And then we did the simplest model that I could. We did a Bayesian categorizer based on a whole bunch of features. Look, deep learning is really fashionable. Next to blockchain, it's probably going to be the biggest attended meeting in this meeting here, the biggest attended sessions in this meeting. But it's not the only way to do things, and it's not even a particularly good way of doing things for most applications. But it's fashionable. You can take a package off the shelf and just run it. You can even get a little stick that you can plug into your laptop that will execute deep learning modules for you. But we're not here to do fads. We're not here to do what's fashionable. We're here to get a job done. And the other part of this is we don't have to solve every problem with neural networks of any sort, or any kind of machine learning. We can use some old-fashioned rules to go along with it. The job in industry is to get the job done. It's not to be pure. And I will tell you, having come from academia myself, it took me a while to get over that, to get over the idea that I do research and make my solution work. No, I have to make the product of the solution actually work. So here's some examples. You don't have to tell me, but try to think about which one of these you think are phishing and which one of these are safe. Have some guesses? These are the red ones are the phishing, and the blue ones are the safe ones. It's hard to tell sometimes which is which. And that's one of the, and notice that they don't seem to really have much of a pattern that resembles the target that they're trying to get to, which is why I think that basically random URLs are probably as good as anything in setting up a phishing site. So we gave several thousand of these URLs, both the good ones and the bad ones, to our Bayesian learner and gave it all those features that I talked about. I don't want to be too precise about exactly what features. And had the neural network, the Bayesian model learn it. And this is our result after a few thousand of these. I present them in a little bit of an unusual way in that I present the safe ones, one result, and so we were about 95, 96% correct on identifying safe URLs as being safe, and we were about 85, 86% correct on identifying the phishing URLs as being phishing. Now, the reason I present them this way is because there's such disparities in the frequencies of phishing versus safe ones that it just doesn't make any sense to use conventional recall and precision. Because I can get pretty much whatever. I can get recall that looks out of this world if I set it up so I want to detect safe URLs, or I can get lousy recall if I want to detect phishing URLs. So rather than play that game, I thought I'd just present them as raw phishing and safe ones. So by itself, this system is not going to do a great job. What we often find in machine learning is that the quality of the data is critical. It turns out that if I run the Bayesian categorizer on the very same data that I trained on, this is about the result I get as well. So I'm not convinced that we have perfect training data, but we've got what we've got, and we have to move forward in the best way that we can. I'm not going to get anybody to sit down and test 20,000 URLs as to whether they're phishing or safe. And even then, if I got two people to do it, they'd disagree. So we just have to kind of marshal on with what we have. Very often when you see things like false alarm rates, false positive rates of 0.001%, basically they're pulling your leg. Because it depends on how you measure it, and people aren't that good. So the ultimate ground truth is imperfect. The data aren't perfect. And when somebody says they get really, really great results, better take that with a few grains of salt, because it's really hard to tell. So the next thing we did was to use adversarial learning to further work on the model. So we have adversarial learning means that we train one system to present URLs, in this case, to our detector, and then our detector has to learn from the URLs that it gets how to distinguish between the fake ones and the real ones. And so our generative model was, again, as the simplest thing I can think of, it was a Markov model with the same statistics as the safe URLs that we've been working with. So the idea is if I want to be a phisher, I'm going to generate fake URLs that look as much like, statistically speaking, because that's what the model's going to learn, that look statistically like the ones I'm trying to fake. And so that's what I did. It's unsupervised learning, meaning that no feedback was necessary there. And it learned the patterns of producing URLs that were statistically the same as the safe URLs. And then on the other side, we use a discriminative model that we've been using before. Again, it's a Bayesian classifier. And then after the data I just showed you, we trained it to detect the fake URLs as phishing. Now, why do we want to do adversarial learning? I mean, most of you have probably seen this slide. If you take a deep neural network and you train it to recognize pictures of things, and then you give it a certain amount of noise, or a certain kind of noise, if you will, you can fake it out. You can make it think it's something else. So people have called this things like hallucinations of deep neural networks, and it's got nothing to do with deep. It's got nothing to do with neural networks. It has a lot to do with the process that's going on. And in this case, what they've done is they've added high-frequency noise. High frequency means it changes a lot from one pixel to the next. And people's eyes tend to focus on the low frequency parts of the signal. So you've got, what this really means is you've got deep neural networks that are learning how to distinguish one class of picture from another, but they're not learning it in the way that you would think they would learn it. That is, the properties of it have nothing to do with pandas, they have to do with pixels. And that's another thing that keep in mind. Now, another part of this is somebody from outside, if they have control over your training set, that is, if they're contributing stuff that you have to analyze and use that to build your training set, they can poison your well. Microsoft had this with one of their voice systems where one of their conversation bots, it learned to be a racist nationalist pig because they didn't filter what was coming in. On the other hand, if they don't have access to your training set, they can still fool it. And the idea is we want to be able to avoid being fooled. So with adversarial learning, it's a war of attrition. The bad guys are trying to fake you out. They're trying to evade detection. The bankers, for example, if you're dealing with counterfeiters, they're trying to detect. And it doesn't take a whole lot. The counterfeiters don't have to know a whole lot about money to make this all work. And here's why. This guy Delgado did a study where he did 179 machine learning categorizers on 121 different data sets. And what he found, you can see here, is that each of the families had both good ones and bad ones, where a family is a method of doing machine learning. Both good and bad. And you couldn't tell by what machine learning method they were using whether it was going to be good or bad. And let me replot these. This shows it ordered by success. And you find out that about 121 of these, a coincidence, are within plus and minus 5% of each other. So we use the statistics to generate URLs. And the other interesting thing that we found was, being a crowded namespace, about half of the URLs that were generated were already registered. Randomly generated URLs, about 50% of them are already registered. So take a look at this and guess which ones are registered, which ones are not. And of course, I will show you. So it's really hard to tell which are registered, which are not. However, the machine learning system managed to learn to distinguish them. So at the end of the training that you saw originally, these are the same data you saw before, we give it random URLs. Oh, it didn't do so well with the random ones. But then when we trained on the random ones and we gave it new random ones, now it knew what to do. So adversarial training can help make the machine learning system more robust. So just a couple of conclusions and then open for questions. So phishing remains an important threat in our email ecosystem. Phishers use machine learning, and the defense has to use machine learning if it's going to keep up with the velocity and ferocity, if you will. Adversaries can attack machine learning without having to know the specifics of it, because most of them give you the same result, as we just saw from Delgado. It's possible to identify phishing URLs with reasonably high accuracy and very low cost, and then spend more money on the things that are uncertain. Many random domains are apparently already registered, so the world is crowded and you have to be able to deal with that. And with this kind of system, we get zero-day identification of phishing. We don't have to wait for blacklists, and if we did, we wouldn't at all be successful. So with that, I have 30 more seconds and then questions, but I'll give up my 30 seconds if you have questions. Okay, well, thanks.